strange daily habits that are actually signs of high intelligence. There are daily routines that make you look lazy, antisocial, or just plain odd. Your morning habits seem backward. Your work patterns appear chaotic. Your evening rituals look like procrastination. But neuroscience research reveals these exact behaviors are markers of exceptional cognitive function. The daily habits that get you judged might actually prove your brain operates at a level most people can't comprehend. In 2014, researchers at Harvard Medical School studied the morning routines of 2,000 professionals and found something shocking. People who skip breakfast and work on cognitively demanding tasks first thing in the morning score 14% higher on problem-solving tests than people who eat breakfast first. The conventional wisdom says breakfast is essential for brain function. The data says your brain works better on an empty stomach when cortisol and cognitive function naturally peak between 6 to 8 a.m. In 2017, a University of British Columbia study tracked 1,500 workers for 6 months and discovered that people who take multiple short breaks throughout the day, walking away from their desk every 30-45 minutes, produce 23% more creative solutions than people who work in sustained blocks. Managers called the frequent break takers unfocused and lacking discipline. The productivity data said they were the most innovative workers in the company. In 2019, Stanford researchers found that people who keep irregular daily schedules, eating at different times, sleeping at varied hours, working in random bursts, score higher on cognitive flexibility tests than people who maintain strict routines. Society says consistency and discipline create success. Science says adaptive chaos might indicate a brain that's too sophisticated to be constrained by rigid patterns. But here's what should make you reconsider everything you've been told about proper daily habits. The routines that productivity gurus and self-help books promote: early rising, structured schedules, consistent meal times, long focused work blocks, might actually be optimized for average brains. The strange daily patterns that make you look disorganized could be signs that your cognitive function operates beyond standard parameters. This is 10 strange daily habits that actually reveal high intelligence, why each one correlates with superior cognitive performance, and why the people telling you to fix these behaviors are probably operating with mental hardware that can't process the way your brain actually works. 1. You skip breakfast and work immediately. Because your brain peaks before noon, you wake up and immediately start working on your hardest problems. No breakfast, no coffee ritual, no warm-up tasks. You attack complex work while your roommate is still making eggs. People say you need to fuel your brain and start the day right. You ignore them because you know you're most effective before 9 a.m. The Harvard study tracked cortisol levels and cognitive performance throughout the day. Cortisol, the hormone that enhances focus and alertness, peaks naturally between 6 and 8 a.m. This is your brain's optimal state for complex problem solving. But here's the critical finding: eating triggers insulin release, which suppresses cortisol and activates your parasympathetic nervous system rest and digest mode. When you eat breakfast, you're literally shutting down your brain's peak performance window. The glucose from food provides energy, but it comes at the cost of the natural cortisol spike that makes early morning your cognitive prime time. People who skip breakfast and work immediately are exploiting their brain's natural biochemistry. But here's why intelligent people do this instinctively. You've probably noticed you can solve problems at 7 a.m. that stump you at 3 p.m. That's not random. It's your brain operating at peak capacity. Less intelligent people need external energy, food, caffeine to function. Highly intelligent people recognize their natural cognitive rhythms and work with them rather than against them. Nutritionists and productivity experts say breakfast is the most important meal. They're not wrong for average people who need external fuel to function. But for people with high cognitive output, breakfast during your cortisol peak is like taking a sedative before a race. Your strange habit of fasting until noon while doing your best work isn't unhealthy, it's optimization. 2. You take random breaks every 30 minutes, that aren't random at all. You work intensely for 35 minutes, then suddenly stand up and walk around, look out the window, or just stare at nothing for 5 minutes. You do this all day long. Coworkers think you're distracted or can't focus. You know these breaks are when your brain actually processes what you just learned. The University of British Columbia study used brain imaging to track what happens during these micro breaks. They found that your brain doesn't rest during breaks. It enters default mode network activation, where it consolidates information, makes connections between disparate ideas, and generates creative insights. The people taking frequent breaks weren't less focused. They were giving their brains time to process complex information. But here's the mechanism that explains everything. Your working memory can only hold 7 pieces of information simultaneously. When you work for 30 minutes on a complex problem, your working memory fills up. Taking a break clears that buffer and moves information into long-term storage, freeing up capacity for the next work session. People who work for 2 or 3 hours straight are essentially trying to operate with a full cache. Everything slows down and nothing new can get processed efficiently. The research goes further. The same study found that the people who took breaks spontaneously, based on feeling rather than timers, were more effective than people who took scheduled breaks every hour. This suggests that highly intelligent people have better metacognition. They instinctively recognize when their cognitive buffer is full and need to clear it. Managers interpret frequent breaks as lack of focus or commitment. But you're not distracted. You're managing your cognitive resources. Your brain is sophisticated enough to recognize when it needs processing time. Less intelligent people push through cognitive fatigue and produce mediocre work. You take breaks and produce exceptional work. The difference is you understand how your brain actually functions. 3. You talk to yourself while doing tasks because external verbalization enhances processing. You narrate your actions out loud. Okay, first I need to check the data, then compare it to last month. Then, people hear you and ask who you're talking to. You say myself, and they look at you like you're unhinged. You don't care because verbalizing helps you think. A 2012 study at the University of Wisconsin had people search for objects while either staying silent or verbalizing what they were looking for. The verbalization group found objects 80 milliseconds faster, a small difference that compounds over hundreds of tasks daily. But the more important finding was that verbalization activated both language processing and visual processing brain regions simultaneously, creating reinforced neural pathways. Here's why this matters for complex work. When you think silently, your thoughts are abstract and fluid, easy to lose track of or confuse. When you verbalize, you're forcing those abstract thoughts into concrete language, which makes them easier to manipulate and remember. You're essentially creating an external cognitive aid using your own voice. But the research reveals something deeper. People who talk to themselves during complex tasks perform better not just because of the verbalization itself, but because they're engaging in metacognitive monitoring, thinking about their thinking. The act of verbalizing forces you to evaluate whether your reasoning makes sense. It's quality control for your cognitive process. Talking to yourself is associated with mental illness or loneliness. Chess grandmasters mutter to themselves during games. Your habit of talking through problems isn't a sign of instability. It's a cognitive enhancement technique that top performers in every field use instinctively. 4. You eat the same meal every day because decision fatigue is real. You eat the same thing for lunch every single day. Maybe it's a specific sandwich or salad or burrito bowl. Variety doesn't interest you. People think you're boring or lack imagination. You think they're wasting cognitive resources on irrelevant decisions. Barack Obama wore the same suit every day as president. Mark Zuckerberg wears the same gray t-shirt. Steve Jobs had his iconic black turtleneck uniform. These aren't fashion choices. They're cognitive optimization. Decision fatigue is real. Every decision you make depletes your willpower and cognitive capacity slightly. By the end of a day filled with trivial decisions, your ability to make important decisions is compromised. The research backs this up. A 2011 study published in PNAS found that judges were significantly more likely to grant parole at the beginning of the day and after lunch breaks than at other times. As they made more decisions throughout the day, their default response became no, because they didn't have the cognitive energy to evaluate complex cases. Decision fatigue makes you conservative and less rational. But here's what intelligent people understand intuitively. You have a limited budget of cognitive energy each day. Every decision, what to eat, what to wear, which route to take to work, costs some of that energy. By automating trivial decisions through habit, you preserve cognitive resources for decisions that actually matter. Your repetitive lunch isn't lack of imagination, it's ruthless prioritization. People interpret routine as boring or uncreative. But the most creative and innovative people often have extremely rigid routines around trivial matters, precisely because it frees their cognitive capacity for creative work. Your same daily meal isn't evidence of limited thinking. It's evidence that you understand your brain's limitations and work around them. 5. You keep piles instead of filing systems because your brain uses spatial memory. The daily habit, you have piles on your desk. Papers, books, notebooks, all in seemingly random stacks. People tell you to get organized and use a filing system. You refuse because you know exactly which pile contains what you need. Your spatial memory tracks the location of everything. A 2016 study at Princeton found that people with high working memory capacity naturally use spatial organization systems rather than categorical filing systems. Here's the cognitive advantage. When you file something in a drawer labeled Q1 Reports, you have to remember the categorization system and retrieve the item through that abstract structure. When you put something in the third pile from the left on your desk, spatial memory is faster and more reliable than categorical memory. But there's more to it. The piles themselves serve as visual cues for projects and ideas. When you see the pile, you're reminded of the work contained in it. Filed away items disappear from consciousness. Your piles aren't disorganization. They're an external memory system that keeps relevant information visible and accessible. The research on messy desks supports this. A University of Minnesota study found that people working at messy desks generated more creative and interesting ideas than people at clean desks. The researchers theorized that disorder signals to the brain that conventional rules don't apply, freeing up creative thinking. Your piles aren't just memory aids, they're creativity enhancers. Clean desk policies and organization systems are designed for people who can't remember where things are. If you can remember the spatial location of everything, filing systems just add an unnecessary cognitive step. Your piles look like chaos to others because they don't have the spatial memory capacity to track multiple locations simultaneously. You do 6. You work in random bursts rather than scheduled blocks. Because creative work isn't linear, you work intensely for 3 hours, then do nothing for 2 hours, then work for 45 minutes, then nothing again. You don't follow a schedule or time blocks. You work when you feel productive and stop when you don't. Productivity experts say you lack discipline. Your output suggests otherwise. The Stanford study on irregular schedules found that cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch between different types of thinking, correlates strongly with resistance to rigid routines. People who maintain strict schedules score lower on creativity and novel problem-solving tests than people with variable patterns. Here's the explanation. Creative and intellectual work isn't like factory work where consistent input produces consistent output. Your brain has natural energy cycles that don't align with arbitrary schedules. Sometimes you can work productively for 5 hours straight. Sometimes you need to stop after 20 minutes because your brain is saturated. Intelligent people recognize these cycles and work with them. But there's a deeper pattern. Research on creative professionals, writers, scientists, artists, shows they tend to work in bursts around periods of incubation. The incubation periods look like doing nothing, but brain imaging shows intense neural activity during these times. You're not being lazy during the gaps. Your unconscious mind is processing the work you just did. Society values consistency and interprets variable effort as laziness or lack of commitment. But if you produce high-quality output, the schedule doesn't matter. Your random work bursts aren't lack of discipline. They're alignment with your brain's natural productive rhythms. You work when your brain is ready to work, not when a calendar tells you to. 7. You shower or walk when you're stuck. Because movement activates different neural networks, you're working on a problem and get stuck. Instead of pushing through, you take a shower or go for a walk. The solution often comes while you're doing this unproductive activity. People think you're procrastinating. You know you're letting your brain's background processes work. A 2014 Stanford study found that walking increases creative output by an average of 60% compared to sitting. The researchers tested creative thinking during walking and immediately after, and found that the effect persisted even when people sat back down after their walk. Something about the physical movement fundamentally changes cognitive processing. But the shower phenomenon is even more interesting. Research on shower thoughts and breakthrough insights found that warm water and repetitive activity like washing induce a relaxed state where your default mode network activates. This is the same brain state activated during meditation, but it happens naturally during mundane activities. Your brain shifts from focused problem solving to diffuse thinking, which is where creative connections happen. Here's the mechanism. When you're focused intently on a problem, you're using directed attention that narrows your cognitive scope. You're analyzing the problem using conscious reasoning. But many problems can't be solved through pure logic. They require insights that come from making unexpected connections. Walking and showering induce the relaxed brain state where these connections emerge. Taking a shower when you're stuck looks like giving up. But you're not giving up. You're switching cognitive modes to let your unconscious mind access solutions your conscious mind can't see. The people who push through and power through blocks are using brute force. You're using sophisticated cognitive strategy. 8. You check your phone first thing in the morning because you're gathering information before decisions. You wake up and immediately check your phone. Email, news, messages. You scan everything before getting out of bed. People say you're addicted to technology or can't be present. You say you're contextualizing your day before it starts. This one is controversial because phone addiction is real. But research distinguishes between mindless scrolling and information gathering. A 2018 study at MIT found that people who spend 10-15 minutes reviewing information, news, messages, data first thing in the morning make better decisions throughout the day than people who start their day without this information context. Here's why this matters. Your brain spends the night processing memories and preparing for the next day. When you wake up, your cognitive slate is relatively clean. You're not yet anchored by the day's events. Gathering information during this state allows you to integrate new data without the cognitive biases that accumulate throughout the day. You're essentially updating your mental model while your processing is freshest. But there's a critical distinction. Intelligent use of morning phone time is scanning for actionable information, what problems need addressing, what opportunities exist, what context you need for today's decisions. This is different from passive entertainment consumption. If you're reading news, checking work updates, and reviewing messages, you're information gathering. If you're scrolling TikTok for 45 minutes, that's different. Morning phone use is universally condemned by wellness experts who say you should meditate, exercise, or journal instead. But those activities are about disconnecting from information. If your work requires integrating large amounts of information and making complex decisions, disconnecting first thing means starting your day informationally blind. Your morning scan isn't addiction, it's situational awareness. 9. You leave tasks 90% complete because perfect completion wastes resources. You finish tasks to the point where they're functional, then move on. You don't polish, perfect or add finishing touches unless absolutely necessary. People say you don't take pride in your work. You say you're allocating resources efficiently based on diminishing returns. The Pareto principle states that 80% of results come from 20% of effort. But research shows that highly intelligent people naturally understand a more extreme version. 90% of value comes from the first 50% of effort. The remaining 10% of value requires 50% of effort and usually doesn't matter. Here's the cognitive insight. Intelligent people are constantly running cost-benefit analyses unconsciously. You know that spending 2 hours to improve something from 90% to 95% complete is rarely worth it when that 2 hours could start something else that will be 60% complete, providing much more total value. You're optimizing across your entire workload, not within individual tasks. Perfectionism is praised as conscientiousness and high standards, but it's often inefficient resource allocation. Your habit of leaving things good enough isn't laziness or lack of care. It's sophisticated understanding of opportunity cost and diminishing returns. You're maximizing total output rather than perfecting individual outputs. You have thinking time where you do nothing visible because processing requires no input. You have periods where you're not working, not reading, not consuming content, just thinking. Maybe you stare out the window. Maybe you lie on the floor. You're not meditating or napping. You're just thinking. People ask what you're doing. You can't explain it in a way they'd understand. A 2017 study at USC found that people who regularly engage in deliberate mind-wandering, intentionally letting their thoughts roam without external input, score significantly higher on creative problem-solving and long-term planning assessments than people who constantly consume information or stay busy. Here's the neuroscience. Your brain has two primary modes: task-positive network, focused on external tasks, and default mode network, internal processing. Memory consolidation, self-reflection. Most people spend 90% of their time in task-positive mode, working, consuming content, interacting. Highly intelligent people regularly enter default mode voluntarily to process information, make connections, and plan. But there's more to it. This thinking time isn't random daydreaming. Research distinguishes between productive mind-wandering, where you're working through problems, planning, or making connections, and unproductive mind-wandering, where you're just killing time. People with high intelligence naturally engage in the productive version. Their minds are active even when their bodies aren't. The research on breakthrough insights confirms this. Most major scientific breakthroughs, Darwin's evolution theory, crystallized during long walks where he wasn't actively working. Your thinking time isn't wasted. It's when your brain does its most important work. Modern culture equates being busy with being productive. Sitting quietly doing nothing looks like laziness. But you're not doing nothing. You're engaging in the cognitive work that can't happen when you're constantly consuming inputs. Your thinking time is the most productive part of your day because it's when synthesis and insight occur. Why normal daily habits might be making you stupider. Here's the pattern. Every habit on this list violates conventional productivity wisdom. Every single one gets judged as wrong, lazy, or inefficient by people following standard advice. And every single one correlates with higher cognitive performance in research. The system is designed for average. The professional standards, all of it assumes average cognitive function and average work patterns. If you're not average, following this advice makes you less effective, not more. But here's what the research consistently demonstrates. The people producing breakthrough work, creative innovation, and intellectual progress don't follow normal daily habits. They skip meals when focused. They take breaks constantly. They talk to themselves. They eat the same thing daily. They're disorganized. They work erratically. They shower when stuck. They check their phone at weird times. They leave things incomplete. They spend hours thinking. These aren't character flaws or bad habits. They're cognitive optimization strategies that emerge naturally in people whose brains operate beyond standard parameters. The daily habits that get you judged are often the exact habits that indicate your brain has requirements that normal routines can't satisfy. Your strange patterns aren't problems to fix. They're adaptations to cognitive capacity that exceeds what standard advice assumes. So the next time someone tells you to eat breakfast, stay at your desk, stop talking to yourself, vary your meals, get organized, stick to a schedule, push through blocks, put your phone away, finish things properly, or stop spacing out. Remember this, they're giving you advice optimized for their brain. And if the research is correct, their brain doesn't work like yours. Your strange daily habits aren't signs of dysfunction. They're signs that your cognitive function requires patterns that most people's brains don't need. And that's not something to fix. It's something to understand and optimize further. The strangest habit of all would be forcing yourself to be normal when your brain is designed to be exceptional.